Some minds don't sleep, they remember.
There is a silent confrontation shaping an entire region, a place where hope and despair intertwine in the very breath of millions. This is the story of Israel and Iran. It is a name that has echoed for decades like a somber heartbeat, stirring souls torn between peace and chaos. Analysts dissect it in thousands of pages. Diplomats travel millions of miles to extinguish the flames. But history, in a cold whisper, tells a different story. This is not just a war of malware and assassinations. It is a crossroads of power schemes, covert strikes, and unspoken threats, a place where peace is but a fragile dream. Some hear the ambulance sirens and think it is someone else's tragedy. Some stand on the edge, searching for the light of reconciliation, and some are forever swept away, consumed by the flames of war. In your eyes, what are Israel and Iran? A miracle of peace within reach? A painful tragedy where smoke and blood mix? Or a mirror reflecting the naked truth about humanity with all its ambition, arrogance, and wounds that never heal? Let's step into the story of this conflict, where hope and chaos intertwine, blending into a song both fierce and painful about ourselves. Share your thoughts in the comments, press like if you feel its weight, and subscribe to the channel to face the brutal chapters ahead. Join me as we return to the moment the darkness was torn asunder. Dawn, June 13th, 2025. The skies over Iran are still cloaked in darkness. The people of Tehran, of Isfahan, are still asleep. They do not know that to the west, a massive aerial armada of over 200 Israeli fighter jets has crossed the airspace of multiple nations to begin a military campaign of unprecedented scale and audacity. Operation Lion's Rise. Stealthy F-35I Adir jets lead the way, clearing a path and blinding air defense systems. Following them are F-15I Rayam jets, carrying heavy-duty bombs and the backbone of the attack. The F-16I Sufa, Storm in Hebrew, a version custom designed for the Israeli Air Force, taking off from distant bases. Refueled in midair, carrying precision-guided glide bombs. The targets are not conventional military bases. The targets are the heart and brain of Iran's nuclear and military program. About 100 targets across the country are struck simultaneously. The nuclear facilities at Natanz and Fordow are rocked. Military bases and command centers in Tehran, Hamadan, and Tabriz are engulfed in flames. But that is not all. At the same time, Mossad's special operations teams, believed to have been operating covertly beforehand, carry out targeted assassinations. In the first few hours alone, at least 78 people were killed, including at least 5 senior generals and 6 of Iran's top nuclear scientists. It is a preemptive strike designed to decapitate the snake, an unmistakable message from Tel Aviv: we will wait no longer. The world holds its breath. Iran's retaliation is swift and fierce. They no longer respond through proxies. This time, they act themselves. Imagine you are in Tel Aviv, the night of June 14th. You're sitting in a cafe, trying to live a normal life, and then, the warning app on your phone shrieks. Air raid sirens begin to wail across the city. You have 90 seconds to run to a bomb shelter. You run, and you hear the distinctive thump of the Iron Dome air defense system firing overhead, trying to intercept a rain of steel hurtling down from the sky. But the Iron Dome, as advanced as it is not invincible. Hundreds of ballistic missiles and drones are launched from Iran. Some are intercepted, but others get through. Buildings in Haifa, in Tel Aviv, are destroyed. Hundreds are wounded. Fear takes hold. The war is no longer happening in distant Syria. It is happening right on their streets. For 12 days, the two nations are locked in a spiral of retaliation. Israel continues its airstrikes, Iran continues to launch missiles. Casualties on both sides mount, hundreds in Iran, dozens in Israel. Each number is a life, a shattered family. Meanwhile, in Washington, in Brussels, in Moscow, diplomats work around the clock. Urgent phone calls, calls for restraint, but it seems no one can extinguish the flames. And then, on June 22nd, a third player decides they will no longer just stand by as a referee. They will step directly into the ring. The United States of America. President Donald Trump, in a speech from the White House, announces Operation Midnight Hammer. It is a terrifying display of military technological might. B-2 Spirit stealth bombers, taking off from a base in Missouri, fly halfway around the world, refueled in midair, and silently enter Iranian airspace. They are not carrying conventional bombs. They carry the U.S. military's master key, GBU-57 massive ordnance penetrators, each weighing over 13,000 kilograms, designed to penetrate tens of meters of concrete and earth before detonating. Their targets are Iran's most heavily fortified nuclear facilities, especially the uranium enrichment facility at Fordow, built deep inside a mountain. President Trump declares that the facilities have been completely obliterated. The U.S. Secretary of Defense insists this is not an act aimed at regime change, but only to neutralize a threat. But for Iran, it is an unacceptable humiliation. For the world, it is a dangerous escalation. The U.S. has officially abandoned its role as a mediator to become a combatant. Let's pause here for a moment. Take a deep breath with me. I know, all these events, the explosions, the news reports, the declarations, it's overwhelming. It's hard to know how to feel. Are you also feeling a tangle of conflicting emotions? A part of me feels fear, a very real fear of a third world war. Another part feels weary, a sense that this is just another chapter in an endless story of violence in the Middle East. But then, there's a very small part, a part one almost dare not admit, that feels captivated by the drama, by the scale, by the feeling of witnessing history unfold before my very eyes. No matter how horrifying, do you feel that too? And thinking about it, I wonder, what was the last straw? In a relationship, in a family, or between nations, there is always a moment when the silence shatters. For you, what was that moment in this story? Share your thoughts in the comments. This conversation truly needs different perspectives. Because our story tonight is not just to report what happened in those 12 terrifying days. Our journey is an investigation to answer the core question, how did we get here? To understand the explosions of tonight, we must go back and listen to the whispers of decades past. In the next part, we will set aside the missiles and bombers. We will travel back in time, to a moment when few could have imagined that Israel and Iran were once friends. We will confront the ghosts of 1979. The ghosts of 1979. In the last part, we stood in the eye of the storm of an open war. We heard the sirens, the whistle of missiles, in absolute hostility, a readiness to destroy one another. When we look at the image of Israel and Iran today, that hostility seems like a destiny, an obvious, eternal truth, like the desert must have sand, and winter must be cold. But tonight, I want you to set that obvious truth aside, because, in the flow of memory, there are forgotten chapters. There was a time, not so long ago, when if you told someone in Tel Aviv or Tehran that their two nations would one day become mortal enemies, they would have laughed and called you crazy. Let's go back together, not a journey into battles, but into the memory of a lost friendship. Let's go to Tehran in the 1960s and 1970s. It was not a city of clerics in black robes. It was a city trying to rapidly westernize under the rule of Shah Mohammad Reza Pahlavi. Women wore short skirts and drove cars. Cinemas showed Hollywood movies, and at the extravagant parties of the elite, champagne flowed freely. And in that world, Israel was not the little Satan. Israel was a friend, a strategic ally. Imagine the faded photographs, Israeli and Iranian generals standing side by side, smiling and shaking hands, military contracts worth hundreds of millions of dollars being signed. Israel sold weapons to Iran sold oil to Israel. Israeli agricultural experts helped Iran turn arid lands into green fields. Israel's national airline, El Al, had daily direct flights to Tehran. Mossad and SAVAK agents cooperated closely to fight their common enemies, Arab nationalist states and the Soviet Union. They were two non-Arab nations, situated in a sea of Arab states. They shared a common enemy, and they shared a great friend across the ocean, the United States. That relationship, in terms of geopolitical logic, was perfectly sensible, a friendship based on mutual interests. But then, an earthquake struck, an earthquake not from the earth, but from the hearts of the people. The Iranian Islamic Revolution was not just a political overthrow. It was a transformation of the soul of an entire nation. It didn't just change the leader, it changed the very definition of what Iran was. The opulence of the Shah's regime, social inequality, and the overwhelming influence of Western culture had created a simmering resentment within Iranian society. And Ayatollah Ruhollah Khomeini, an exiled cleric, became the torch for that resentment. He didn't just promise political change, he promised a spiritual purification, a return to the true values of Shia Islam. When the Shah, suffering from cancer, left Iran in January 1979, it was the end of an era. When Ayatollah Khomeini returned from Paris to the welcome of millions, it was the beginning of a new one. And in this new worldview, the map of friendship and enmity was completely redrawn. America, the Shah's patron, was no longer a friend. America became the great Satan, the source of all decadence and oppression in the world. And Israel, the great Satan's best friend in the region, seen as a foreign entity, a Western outpost planted in the heart of the Islamic world, automatically became the little Satan. This hostility was not just about politics, it was about ideology, it was about religion. The new Islamic Republic was born with a mission, not just to rule Iran, but to export the revolution. They believed they were the standard bearers of a global uprising of oppressed Muslims, especially Shias, and in that struggle, the liberation of Jerusalem from Israeli control became one of the central slogans. A sacred goal. Immediately, the Israeli embassy in Tehran, a symbol of the old friendship, was closed and handed over to Yasser Arafat's Palestine Liberation Organization. All ties were severed, but Iran didn't stop at words. They began to act. They began to build their extended arms, their proxy forces, to wage their war far from home. Let's go to Lebanon in the 1980s, the nation ravaged by civil war. From that chaos, with the funding, training, and direction of Iran's Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, a new organization was born. Its name was Hezbollah. From a small militia, Hezbollah grew into one of the most powerful military and political forces in the region. They have missiles, well-trained soldiers, and an absolute loyalty to Tehran's ideology. And their number one enemy, clearly defined in their charter, is Israel. Years later, another arm was nurtured, this time in the Gaza Strip. Hamas, although a Sunni Muslim organization, different from Iran's Shia faith, they shared a common enemy, And in Middle Eastern politics, the enemy of my enemy is my friend. Iran became one of Hamas's main sponsors, providing money, weapons, and technology so they could continue their armed struggle against Israel. 1979 gave birth to a two-headed monster for Israel. One was the direct hostility from a large, powerful nation. The other was the rise of non-state actors right on their borders. Nurtured and directed by that very nation, a friendship had died, a ghost of ideological enmity was born, and it would haunt the Middle East to this day. I'm sure you, like me, have looked back on an old relationship, maybe a childhood friendship, a first love that was once so close. You flip through the memories, the laughter, the promises, and then you stop at a moment, an event, a misunderstanding, a change in belief that shattered it all and turned two people who were once intimate into strangers, or even enemies. That feeling, doesn't it leave you confused and heartbroken? The feeling when you ask yourself, how could two people who once shared everything now not even be able to look at each other? Now, try to do something with me. Take that feeling of confusion and heartbreak and multiply it by the scale of two entire nations, a rupture that affects not just two people, but tens of millions, and reshapes the landscape of an entire region for nearly half a century. Can you feel its weight? Leave your thoughts in the comments. The ideological hostility was born from the ghosts of 1979, but it would now become existentially dangerous enough to destroy them both, until a new kind of weapon appeared, a weapon with the power to turn threats into reality. In the next part, we will hear the ticking of the nuclear clock. In the previous part, we journeyed back to 1979. We witnessed the rupture of a friendship and the birth of an enmity based not just on geopolitical interests, but carved deep by ideology and religion. A ghost was born, but for many years, that ghost, though frightening, remained at a safe distance. The hostility was expressed through fiery rhetoric, through the funding of proxy forces. It was a war of influence, a war of attrition. But then, a new sound began to echo in the darkness of the Middle East. A small, yet haunting sound. It was the ticking of a clock that doesn't count time. It counts down to an irreversible moment. The moment a nation acquires the power of the gods, the power to annihilate an entire city with the push of a button. It is the nuclear clock. Tonight, we will talk about existential fear, the fear of being wiped off the map. We will talk about a race in the shadows, a war of scientists, of spies, and of ruthless decisions made to prevent the apocalypse. Let's start with Iran. After the revolution, and especially after the bloody 8-year war with Iraq, the leadership in Tehran came to a conclusion: to survive in a hostile region, to deter intervention from the great state in America, they needed the ultimate insurance policy. And there is no better insurance policy than a nuclear bomb. Iran's nuclear program began in secret. They built research facilities, uranium enrichment plants in remote locations, and often deep underground. The facility at Natanz, at Isfahan, and especially the facility at Fordow, built inside a rocky mountain, were designed to withstand conventional airstrikes. Publicly, Iran always insisted its program was for peaceful purposes only, generating electricity and medical isotopes. They were a signatory to the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty and, in theory, had the right to enrich uranium for civilian purposes. But the problem is, the process to enrich uranium for a nuclear power plant and the process to enrich uranium for a nuclear bomb are essentially the same. The difference is just a matter of time and the number of centrifuges. And for years, Iran played a cat-and-mouse game with the international community, especially with the International Atomic Energy Agency. They concealed facilities, restricted inspections, and constantly provided conflicting information. They were enriching uranium. They were developing ballistic missile technologies capable of carrying nuclear warheads, but they always insisted they had no intention of building a bomb. They were walking a fine line, a deliberate ambiguity. For most of the world, it was a complex diplomatic problem to be solved with sanctions and negotiations. But for another country in the region, that ambiguity was not an option. For Israel, it was an existential threat. To understand Israel's reaction, we must understand a strategic doctrine that has shaped their security policy for decades. The Begin Doctrine. In 1981, Israeli intelligence discovered that Iraq, under Saddam Hussein, was secretly building a nuclear reactor named Osirak. With French help, the Israeli Prime Minister at the time, Menachem Begin, a Holocaust survivor, faced an impossible decision. He believed that if a mortal enemy like Saddam Hussein acquired nuclear weapons, it would be the end of the Jewish state. Despite opposition from almost the entire world, including its closest ally, the United States, he gave a daring order. On June 7, 1981, a squadron of Israeli F-16 fighter jets flew a long-distance route, crossing enemy airspace, and bombed the Osirak reactor into rubble. That act gave birth to the Begin Doctrine. Israel will never, under any circumstances, allow a hostile nation in the region to possess nuclear weapons. They will act preemptively, alone if necessary, to eliminate that threat before it materializes. For Israel, the fear of a nuclear-armed Iran is not just a strategic calculation. It is a historical obsession. It is the fear of a second Holocaust. Try to put yourself in their shoes. You are a small nation, surrounded by enemies. The supreme leader of your greatest enemy publicly calls for your annihilation. That enemy is funding terrorist groups right on your borders, groups with tens of thousands of rockets pointed at your cities. And now, that enemy is on the path to acquiring a weapon that could turn their threats into reality in a single morning. What would you do? Would you trust in diplomatic promises, in fragile international agreements, or would you act according to the doctrine that saved you once before? And Israel did act, but because a large-scale airstrike on Iran was too great a gamble, one that could ignite an all-out war, they chose a different battlefield, a battlefield in the shadows. This war had no tanks, no infantry. Its weapons were magnetic bombs attached to cars, silenced pistols, and intelligence precise to the minute. Its targets were individuals, the most important brains of the Iranian nuclear program. From 2010 to 2012, a series of Iranian nuclear scientists were mysteriously assassinated. Masoud Alamohammadi, a quantum physics professor, was killed by a bomb-rigged motorcycle that exploded as he left his home. Majid Shariari, a leading nuclear scientist, also died in a similar car bombing. Dariush Rezai-Nejad, another expert, was shot dead by gunmen on a motorcycle in front of his wife and child. Iran has always accused Israel's Mossad intelligence agency of being behind these attacks. Israel has never admitted, nor denied. They just remained silent, a meaningful silence. And then, in November 2020, the shadow war reached a new peak of technology and audacity. The target this time was Mohsen Fakhrizadeh, considered the father of the Iranian nuclear program. He was the most heavily guarded target. Imagine a deserted highway outside Tehran. Fakhrizadeh's convoy is moving, and then, a Nissan truck parked on the roadside suddenly explodes. As the convoy stops, a hail of bullets rains down on Fakhrizadeh's car, but there was no assassin there. According to later reports, the entire attack was carried out by a remote-controlled machine gun operated via satellite. With the help of artificial intelligence to identify the target, a robotic assassination, a weapon straight out of a science fiction movie. It was a dual message: we can get to you anywhere, and our technology is always one step ahead of yours. Each assassination, each act of sabotage at a nuclear facility, was an attempt to slow the ticking of the clock, to buy more time, but it was also an act of pouring fuel on the fire. Each scientist killed only strengthened Iran's determination to acquire nuclear weapons for self-defense. Each attack pushed the two nations closer to a direct confrontation. It is a vicious cycle of violence and fear, a deadly chess game played by spies and scientists. That forces me to ask you, and also to ask myself tonight, when you face a threat that you believe could erase your very existence, how far would you go? Where would you and I draw the fine line between legitimate self-defense and a preemptive strike? And the hardest question of all, can the assassination of scientists, who may simply be doing their jobs, ever be justified? Can writing equations on a blackboard become a death sentence? These are questions with no easy answers. Are they? They make us uncomfortable because they are not black and white, only a gray area of impossible choices. And as we sit here, in the safety of our rooms, thousands of miles away, do we, as outsiders, have the right to judge them? This is a heavy conversation, and I truly want to hear your thoughts in the comments. A like and subscribe to the channel will show that you are also grappling with these questions alongside me. Because this nuclear confrontation has a large audience, a powerful friend of Israel, and also an adversary of Iran, a player with the ability to change the entire chessboard. In the next part, we will examine the complex and contradictory role of the United States in this dangerous chess game. America's balancing act. In the previous part, we listened to the ticking of the nuclear clock, a sound that shaped Israel's existential fear and fueled a secret, ruthless war in the shadows, a life-or-death confrontation between two nations. But in any tragedy, there are never just two main characters. There is always a third force, a giant standing in the wings, observing, and sometimes silently pulling the strings. Tonight, we will talk about that giant, the United States. For decades, America's role in the Israel-Iran drama has been one of the most complex and spectacular balancing acts in modern diplomatic history. It's like a tightrope walker, with the abyss of all-out war on one side, and the abyss of a nuclear-armed Iran on the other, and that rope has become increasingly fragile. To understand this drama, we must look at the two roles America has always tried to play simultaneously. The daytime role, the world's mediator. In the light of the meeting rooms in Geneva and Vienna, America has always played the part of a responsible mediator. They initiated sanctions, but they also led negotiations. They were the chief architect of the 2015 Iran nuclear deal, also known as the JCPOA. Remember that moment, a rare moment of hope. Diplomats from around the world smiled and shook hands. It was believed that the path of bombs had been replaced by the path of dialogue. The deal, essentially, was a bargain. Iran agreed to significantly limit its nuclear program and accept stringent international inspections. In return, the US and other world powers would lift the economic sanctions that were crippling their country. That was America's public role, a role of restraint, of diplomacy, of the belief that even the bitterest enemies could find a peaceful solution. But when night falls, another role begins, the nighttime role, the silent ally. While diplomats were debating every word in the agreement, elsewhere, US military transport planes were still regularly landing in Israel. They weren't carrying diplomatic memos, they were carrying bunker-busting bombs, advanced missile systems, and F-35 stealth fighter jets, a weapon no other country in the Middle East possessed. Every year, the US provides Israel with billions of dollars in military aid. It's not just money, it's an implicit guarantee that Israel will always have a qualitative military edge over all its adversaries combined. And that support doesn't stop at weapons. When Israeli fighter jets fly over Syria to strike alleged Iranian targets almost weekly, the Pentagon often maintains a meaningful silence. Publicly, they call for restraint from all parties, but unofficially, everyone understands that these attacks involve intelligence sharing and a strategic green light from the US. Israel is doing the job that the US doesn't want to do itself, containing Iran's expansion in the region. It's a two-faced drama. On one hand, the US is the patron of the nuclear deal, trying to bring Iran back into the international community. On the other hand, the US is arming Iran's greatest enemy and tacitly approving military actions against Iran's interests. Why this contradiction? Why play such a complex role? The answer lies in America's own conflicting national interests. For Washington, Israel is not just an ally. Israel is an extension of American power in the Middle East, a stable democracy, a military and technological powerhouse, an unsinkable aircraft carrier located in one of the most volatile regions in the world. This relationship is not just strategic, it is reinforced by incredibly strong historical, cultural, and domestic political ties. Ensuring Israel's security is a non-negotiable element of US foreign policy, regardless of the president. But Iran is a completely different puzzle. Iran is both an adversary and a power that cannot be ignored. They're a threat with their nuclear program and their support for proxy groups. But they are also a large nation of 90 million people, controlling a large part of the Strait of Hormuz, the choke point of the global oil supply. An all-out war with Iran, or the collapse of its regime, could cause even greater chaos, drive oil prices sky high, and create a power vacuum that extremist groups like ISIS could fill. So, America's goal is not to destroy Iran, but to manage Iran, to contain them, but not to push them to the brink, to punish them, but still leave a door open for diplomacy. It is an incredibly sophisticated balancing act. It's like a father trying to mediate between two bickering children. He loves them both, but is slightly biased towards the weaker child, secretly slipping him the best toys for self-defense. He scolds both when they fight, but secretly hopes the stronger child won't go too far. And for years, that drama, though tense, continued, until one day, the father's patience ran out. June 2025, the open war between Israel and Iran, as we saw in part 1, has broken all the rules. Missiles are flying back and forth. Casualties are rising daily. The balancing rope is about to snap. And then, the US decides to stop balancing. The US decides to jump in. Operation Midnight Hammer was not just an airstrike. It was a declaration that the two-faced drama was over. Try to imagine the moment that news broke. You're at home, maybe in a small town in Ohio or California. You're watching an entertainment show, and then it's interrupted by a special report. The president is speaking from the Oval Office. He announces that American planes have just attacked nuclear facilities in a distant country called Iran. What is your first feeling? Probably a sense of distance, almost irrelevance. It's happening halfway around the world. But then, other thoughts start to creep in. What will gas prices be tomorrow? How will the stock market react? Is the neighbor's son or daughter, who is serving in the military in the Middle East, safe? In that moment, you realize that the shadow of this silent war is much longer than you thought. It doesn't just cover the Middle East, it reaches every gas station, every investment portfolio, and every family in America. That airstrike was a turning point. The United States officially abandoned its role as mediator to become a direct combatant. They chose a side, openly and decisively. They decided that the risk of a nuclear-armed Iran was greater than the risk of a widening regional war. The balancing act was over. The curtain had fallen, and a new, more dangerous, unpredictable play was about to begin. I think all of us have been in a situation like that. Haven't we? Caught between two friends, two relatives in conflict. You choose your words carefully, trying to keep the peace, trying not to offend anyone, but in your heart, you know you're leaning towards one side, and then comes a time when you realize you can't keep balancing on that rope anymore. The exhaustion of having to act, of having to weigh every word, forces you to choose. That moment, when you finally speak your truth, what does it feel like? Is it a sense of relief, or the beginning of a series of unforeseen consequences? These are very human stories, and I believe many of us have similar experiences. Share them in the comments. If you feel comfortable, a like and subscribe to the channel will show that you are also here, contemplating these complex chess games with me, because the United States has stepped out of the shadow of that choice. But their real war, and that of their ally Israel, is not just being fought in the skies. It has been going on for a long time, in an invisible space, where there are no emotions, only cold lines of code. In the next part, we will step into the war of digital ghosts. The war in the shadows. In the previous part, we witnessed a complex balancing act collapse. We saw the giant named America, after decades of playing a two-faced mediator, finally decide to jump into the rain. Operation Midnight Hammer tore through the curtain of ambiguity, turning a regional conflict into a global issue. The roar of the B-2 bombers still echoes, but perhaps we were wrong to think that the war only began in June 2025. Perhaps what we saw, the missiles, the airstrikes, was not the beginning. It was just the loud conclusion of another war, one that had been waged for years, in near total silence, a war with no trenches, no declarations, no parading armies. Tonight, we will step into that war, the war in the shadows, a 21st century war, waged not with tanks and infantry, but with lines of code, nameless assassins, and drones hovering like hawks in the desert sky. To understand this war, we must redefine the battlefield. The battlefield is no longer a specific piece of land. It is everywhere. It is in the fiber optic cables at the bottom of the ocean. It is in the narrow alleys of Damascus. It is in the very car of a scientist on his way to work. Let's start with the first, most invisible battlefield, cyberspace. Around 2010, engineers at the uranium enrichment facility in Natanz, Iran, began to notice something strange. Their centrifuges, high-tech machines that spin at supersonic speeds to separate uranium isotopes, started to fail at an alarming rate. They would uncontrollably speed up, then vibrate violently and destroy themselves. At first, they thought it was a technical glitch. Due to poor quality parts, they replaced them, but then the new machines also broke. A sense of bewilderment spread. It seemed like a ghost was haunting the plant, and it was indeed a ghost, a digital ghost. Its name was Stuxnet. Stuxnet was not an ordinary computer virus. It was a masterpiece of cyber warfare, a digital weapon of unprecedented sophistication. It is believed to have been a secret joint project between American and Israeli intelligence. Imagine its journey. It didn't spread through the internet. It was loaded onto a USB drive, and somehow, perhaps through an engineer working at the plant, it managed to bypass the air-gap defense, the complete isolation from external networks, to infiltrate Natanz's internal control system. Once inside, Stuxnet lay dormant, like a predator stalking its prey. It didn't attack immediately. It learned, it recorded the system's normal operations. It searched for a specific type of programmable logic controller from Siemens, the brain that controlled the speed of the centrifuges. And when it found its target, it struck. It executed an incredibly cunning two-pronged attack. On one hand, it secretly ordered the centrifuges to spin at dangerous speeds, sometimes fast, sometimes slow, causing resonance and physical destruction. On the other hand, and this was the most brilliant part, it deceived the very engineers who were monitoring the system. Stuxnet had recorded data from a normal operation, and it replayed the data on the engineers' screens. While the centrifuges were tearing themselves apart, on the control monitors, all parameters remained green. Everything appeared to be perfectly normal. It was the perfect sabotage, hidden within a digital illusion. Stuxnet was a turning point in the history of warfare. For the first time, a digital weapon crossed the boundary between the virtual and the real world, causing concrete physical damage. It didn't just delete data, it destroyed machinery. It proved that a war could be waged without a single shot being fired. After Stuxnet, the Shadow War escalated. Iran responded by building a powerful army of hackers, launching attacks on banks, energy companies, and infrastructure in the US and its allies. A tit-for-tat war in cyberspace, where each side tried to find the other's weaknesses. But not all shadow wars are fought on computer screens. Some require blood to be shed. Let's return to the assassinations we discussed in part 3. That is another battlefield, a human one, where the targets are not machines, but brains. Eliminating a top scientist like Mohsen Fakhrizadeh not only slowed down Iran's nuclear program technically, it also sowed deep psychological fear. It sent a message to everyone working in that program: nowhere is safe. We know who you are, we know where you live, and we can get to you anytime. It is a form of psychological warfare, executed with surgical precision. And then, there is a third battlefield, a vast, complex battlefield where rules seem not to exist. It is the battlefield of proxy forces. Let's go to the skies of Syria. For nearly a decade, Syria has been mired in civil war, turning it into a geopolitical chessboard for regional powers. Iran, aiming to build a Shia corridor from Tehran to the Mediterranean, poured troops and weapons in to support President Bashar al-Assad's regime. They built bases, missile depots, and transported weapons to their biggest ally there, Hezbollah. For Israel, this was a nightmare scenario. The military presence of their mortal enemy right on their northern border. And they responded with a campaign known as the War Between the Wars. Almost weekly, for years, Israeli fighter jets conducted hundreds, if not thousands, of airstrikes on Iranian and Hezbollah targets across Syria. And here is the strangest part: almost no one admitted anything. Israel rarely confirmed a specific attack. Iran rarely acknowledged its losses. Syria would occasionally claim to have shot down most of the enemy's missiles. Russia, Syria's patron, usually remained silent. It was a dance of silence and violence, an undeclared war, taking place right before the world's eyes, but deliberately ignored by all parties involved. Why? Because those were the rules of the shadow war. Plausible deniability. As long as Israel didn't publicly celebrate an attack, as long as Iran didn't publicly acknowledge a high-ranking officer being killed, neither side was backed into a corner, pressured to retaliate openly and forcefully. It allowed them to maintain a controllable threshold of violence, a way to weaken the enemy without triggering an all-out war. Iran also played this game masterfully. They did not directly attack Israel. They responded through their proxies. Hezbollah in Lebanon might fire a few rockets across the border. Shia militias in Iraq might attack bases housing U.S. troops. The Houthi forces in Yemen might attack shipping in the Red Sea. Each attack caused damage, sent a message, but always with a buffer, a layer of deniability to avoid a direct confrontation. So, we have a multi-front war, a war in cyberspace, a war of assassins, and a proxy war across the Middle East, a complex chess game where each side calculates every move, trying to inflict losses on the opponent without upsetting the entire board. For years, that fragile balance, those unwritten rules, were maintained, but then, something changed. Perhaps it was the rapid progress of Iran's nuclear program that made Israel feel time was running out. Perhaps it was a change in the American political landscape that created an opportunity. Perhaps it was a miscalculation, a shadow attack that went too far, that crossed an invisible red line that only the two sides understood. We don't know for sure. We only know that in June 2025, one side decided that playing chess in the dark was no longer enough. They decided to turn on the lights and tear the darkness apart with fire. So, we have walked together through the dark corridors of an undeclared war. A chess game of spies, hackers, and drones. Perhaps you feel the same as I do. That all of this, the assassinations, the computer viruses, it couldn't last forever. That at some point, someone would make a mistake, would cross a line, and the whole board would be overturned. Can a war waged in the shadows stay in the shadows forever? Or does it, like all secrets, eventually come to light, whether we want it to or not? This conversation is nearing its end, and I need your company. Leave your thoughts in the comments. A like and subscribe to the channel will let me know you're ready to face the final chapter with me. Because the war in the shadows has truly ended. The lights have been turned on, but it is not the light of truth, but the light of explosions. A new, much more dangerous and open war has begun. In the final part, we will look at a future written with crossed red lines. A future written in red lines. In the previous part, we stood in the midst of a war in the shadows, a chess game of spies, hackers, and drones, a game with unwritten rules, maintained by fear and a fragile balance. And then, in June 2025, that chessboard was overturned. The roar of fighter jets and the shriek of ballistic missiles replaced the whispers. The war was no longer in the shadows. It had stepped into the light, a blinding, destructive light. Now, after 12 terrifying days, a fragile ceasefire has been established, sponsored by the very player who just stepped into the rain, the United States. But the silence of the guns does not bring peace. It only brings a global holding of breath. The entire world is asking the same question: what happens next? Tonight, we will look together into the murky crystal ball of the future. We will not prophesize. We will only explore the possible paths, the scenarios that could unfold, drawn from what we already know. Scenario 1, the honorable retaliation. Let's look at Tehran, the clerical regime, led by Supreme Leader Ali Khamenei, faces a dilemma. They have just suffered a humiliating blow to the very heart of their nuclear and military program. National pride is wounded. The pressure to retaliate is immense, both from within the country and from proxy forces in the region. But they also know a cold, hard truth. They are no match for the combined military might of the US and Israel. As analyst Ian Parmeter has pointed out, the regime's top priority has always been its own survival. Everything else is secondary. So, what will they do? Perhaps they will do exactly what they did after the US assassinated General Qasem Soleimani in 2020. They promised a harsh revenge, but it ultimately amounted to a series of missiles fired at US bases in Iraq, causing minimal damage and no casualties. A symbolic act, enough to save face with their domestic audience, but not enough to trigger an all-out war. Perhaps, in the coming weeks, we will see a few attacks by Hezbollah on northern Israel, or a drone attack by militias in Iraq on a remote US base. A carefully calculated retaliation. Then, Iran will declare that the debt has been paid, and the matter is closed. It is a dramatic, yet controllable scenario, a scenario where honor is saved, and destruction is postponed. Scenario 2. The silence at the negotiating table. Before the US intervention, Iran had said it was willing to negotiate, but not at gunpoint. Now, with a fragile ceasefire, a door for diplomacy may have opened. Imagine a luxurious room in Vienna or Geneva. The diplomats are back at the table. But this time, the atmosphere is different. Trust, which was already scarce, has now completely evaporated. The US and Europe will say, "You have seen our power. Give up your nuclear program completely, and we will lift the sanctions." Iran, from the position of having just been attacked, might say, "It is precisely because you attacked us that we have more reason to possess nuclear weapons for self-defense." And Israel, standing on the outside, what will it say? Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has already declared that he does not believe in negotiations and will not stop until Iran's entire nuclear infrastructure is destroyed. It's like a bitter divorce. Both sides have been hurt. Both feel they are the victim, and neither is willing to back down. Supreme Leader Khomeini, when he agreed to a ceasefire in the war with Iraq, said the decision was worse than drinking poison. Would his successor, Khamenei, be willing to drink that poison again to save the regime? Or will national pride and hardline stances prevail? This is a scenario of stalemate, of endless negotiations. While underground, the centrifuges may start spinning again. In Scenario 3, the balance of fear. This is the most terrifying scenario. The US and Israeli airstrikes may have caused heavy damage, but did they destroy everything? Especially the 400 kilograms of uranium enriched to 60% that Iran possessed? If the answer is no, then what happens? That attack may have inadvertently pushed Iran to a final decision. The decision that ambiguity no longer works. The decision that the only way to ensure no one dares to attack them again is to get the bomb. They might withdraw from the Nuclear Non-Proliferation Treaty, expel all international inspectors, and begin enriching uranium to 90% weapons grade. What would the world do? Would the US and Israel dare to strike again, at the risk of igniting an even more devastating war? Or would they have to accept a new reality? A reality that a final red line has been crossed. Iran has become a nuclear power. And then, a new Cold War would begin in the Middle East, a balance of fear, just like between the US and the Soviet Union in the past. Israel and Iran would point nuclear weapons at each other, and the entire world would have to live under the shadow of mutually assured destruction. It is a peace built on ultimate fear, a silence that comes from both sides knowing that the next wrong move could be the last. So, we have free paths, a controlled retaliation, a deadlocked negotiation, and a new balance of fear. As you lie in bed tonight, in a place that seems so far from this conflict, can you feel its faint tremors? And which scenario keeps you awake more, the roar of a hot war, or the suffocating silence of a new Cold War? Leave your final thoughts in the comments. Thank you for staying awake with Sleepless Mind throughout this long and complex journey. Your patience and reflection are an invaluable inspiration. If these stories mean something to you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue together in the long nights ahead. It is very late now. The silent war may be over, but its echoes, and the questions it leaves behind, will probably resonate forever. The cost of living in someone else's war. In the previous parts of our journey, we have stood on the pinnacles of power. We have been in the Oval Office, listening to the decisions of presidents. We have been in the closed-door meetings of Mossad and the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, trying to decode strategic calculations. We have talked about missiles, about nuclear facilities, about red lines. We have talked about the chess players. Tonight, in this final part, we will leave that chessboard. We will no longer look at those who move the pieces. We will look at the squares on the board themselves, the lands, the homes, the lives that the chess pieces are trampling upon. Tonight, we will talk about the cost of living in someone else's war. Because one of the cruelest truths of modern warfare, especially proxy wars, shadow wars, is that the decision makers rarely had to hear the explosions, and those who hear the explosions have no power to make any decisions. They do not draw the strategic maps, but their homes, their gardens, their villages lie directly on those maps. They do not choose a side, but they are forced to live with the consequences of a power game they will never fully understand. They are the collateral damage, the numbers in a report, the people whose lives are turned upside down by a press conference in a distant capital. And perhaps, the thing that connects all of us, those of us here tonight, with them, is not ideology, not politics. It is the most primal feeling of all, fear. When you are a mother in Tehran, and you hear that the US has bombed a facility near your city, your fear is not political. It is the fear of whether the air your child is breathing is contaminated with radiation. When you are a father in Tel Aviv and the sirens wail, your fear is not about the balance of power in the Middle East. It is the fear of whether the Iron Dome will intercept the missile heading toward your child's school. When you are a young Hezbollah soldier in Beirut, ordered to be ready for battle, your fear is probably not about defending the axis of resistance. It is the fear that you will never see the person you love again. Fear has no nationality. Fear has no ideology. It only needs an explosion, or sometimes, just the threat of a coming explosion, to spread. And in the war between Israel and Iran, there are millions of people living in that fear every day, though they are neither Iranian nor Israeli. They are the citizens of the in-between countries, the lands that have been unwittingly turned into battlefields. Let's go to southern Lebanon. Imagine an old farmer, named Ali. His entire life is tied to his family's olive grove, a grove that was tended by his father and his grandfather. For him, it is not just a livelihood, it is his heritage, his memory. One afternoon, as he is busily tending to the trees, he hears the roar of Israeli fighter jets overhead. It is a sound that has become all too familiar. He sighs and continues his work. He has learned to live with it. But this time, the explosion is very close. An airstrike targeting a Hezbollah position on the next hill. Ali is not harmed, but the blast wave and the shrapnel have destroyed his irrigation system and scorched a part of his grove. His harvest for that year is lost. Ali is not a member of Hezbollah. He doesn't care about Iran's nuclear program. He is just a farmer trying to live a peaceful life. But the war of others has found its way into his garden. Now, let's cross the border to Haifa, a port city in northern Israel. Imagine a 10-year-old girl named Maya. Every night, before she goes to sleep, she doesn't just listen to her mother's fairy tales. She also has to listen to the sound of air raid drills. Her mother has to teach her that when she hears the siren, she must run immediately to the safe room, without hesitation. That night, the siren is not a drill. A barrage of rockets is fired from Lebanon by Hezbollah, in retaliation for some Israeli strike in Syria. Maya cannot sleep. She sits in the shelter, hugging her doll tightly, and listens to the booms of the Iron Dome system overhead. Maya doesn't know who Iran is. She doesn't understand proxy forces. She only knows that some people, somewhere far away, are shooting dangerous things toward her home. Her childhood has no peace. It is measured in sirens. And now, let's go to an even more complex place. Iraq. Imagine a family in Baghdad. They are Sunni Muslims. They have lived through the overthrow of Saddam Hussein, the rise of ISIS, and the intervention of both America and Iran. They support no one. They just want to be left in peace. But their house is near a base with US troops, and that base is frequently attacked by Shia militias backed by Iran. Every night, they hear gunfire, the sound of drones. Then one day, in retaliation, a US airstrike happens near their home, targeting a commander of that militia group. A bomb misses its target. That family loses everything. They are trapped between two powers they do not support, and from whom they cannot escape. They are the nameless victims of a proxy war, a war where their country has been turned into a chessboard for other players. This is the very nature of modern warfare, fighting through others, on others' land. The suffering is outsourced. It allows the major powers to avoid a direct confrontation, to avoid casualties for their own soldiers. But the price of that safety is paid with the blood and tears of innocent people in Lebanon, in Syria, in Iraq, in Yemen, in Gaza. And the connection between power and consequence is sometimes even more direct. A closed-door meeting in Washington, in the Situation Room, can decide on an airstrike target in Damascus. A few hours later, a family in Damascus is shattered. A new economic sanction is passed at the UN headquarters in New York. To put pressure on Tehran, a few months later, a hospital in Tehran lacks the medicine to treat cancer patients. A decision made 1,000 miles away, by people who have never set foot on that land, can determine the life and death of people they will never know. It is a kind of war that no one names, but everyone feels. There is no formal declaration of war. There is no final peace treaty. There is no clear victory. There is only a state of endless anxiety, a cold war that is never truly cold, and its greatest victims are an entire generation, a generation of children across the Middle East, growing up with a vague memory of explosions and a red glow on the horizon. A generation that learns to distinguish the sounds of different types of drones. A generation for whom war is not a historical event in a textbook. It is the air they breathe every day. Tonight, as you and I sit here, in the peace of our own rooms, how many other children are unable to sleep because of the sound of bombs? How many farmers are looking up at the sky and worrying about their crops? How many families are paying the price of someone else's war? Do we, the fortunate ones who live in peace, have any moral responsibility other than to be passive observers? Leave your final thoughts in the comments. Thank you for staying awake with Sleepless Mind through this long and complex journey. Your patience and contemplation are the greatest inspiration. If these stories mean something to you, please leave a like and subscribe to the channel so we can continue to explore together in the long nights ahead. The night is now very late. Let's take a moment to think of them, the nameless people living in the shadow of a war without end. Sleep well, and wish for them a peaceful night. You've crossed the story. You felt every pulse in the dark, and I was there with you, quietly, always. That's why I left behind one last thing. Not to explain, not to impress, just to stay with you a little longer. A song I chose with care, as if tucking you in from across time and space. So go on, lay back, the music knows where to take you. you're still here, then you're something rare. Not many stay this long. So, thank you for choosing to stay. I'm here too, still awake, surrounded by the quiet glow of my editing screen, shaping the next stories just for you. If there's anything you want to leave behind, a whisper, a suggestion, even just a symbol, drop it in the comments. Because maybe, tomorrow night, you'll hear yourself echoed in a story that's never been told before. still here, even now? I have a feeling part of you is still wandering somewhere between wakefulness and dreaming. I know that feeling well because I'm still awake with you. In a quiet room, I'm gently laying out layers of sound, each breath, each beat, preparing the next journey we'll take together. If you're still listening, leave me a sign. Let me know how you're feeling or just where you are in this vast world. Because right now, in this stillness, you are not alone. You're still there, aren't you? I can't see you, but I can feel you. Like a soft signal pulsing across the silence. Over here, I'm still working, refining layers of sound, rewriting fragments of voice, building the landscape for our next adventure. One that you might inspire. If an idea comes to you, share it with me. Comment below. A theme, a memory, a strange dream. I read every word because I never tell these stories alone. I tell them with you.